Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to today's panel discussion. My name is Eric Kruder, and today with me I have Brad Green. He's our software product manager. Greg Salisbury, who's one of our senior sales engineers, and Kevin Mooney, a product specialist. So again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend our webinar, and special thanks to everyone that submitted questions for today. Please also feel free to submit questions in the chat window, and if we have time or we can work them in, we're happy to address additional questions as we talk about some of these topics along the way. Again, we've had really great questions submitted, everything from total control to connect, the router, a little bit with Niagra and Commander. For the sake of time, we're going to save Commander questions for our next webinar and really focus kind of on the router first, move into Connect, and then we'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks inside Niagra at the end. So with that, we'll get right into it. Our first question is for Kevin. We have a lot of questions about how we use the router as a service tool. Let's talk about what some of the easiest ways to use the router as a service tool would be.
Thanks, Eric. Got to show my screen here. All right. So first things first, I always like to refer people to the documentation. So you see the document here on the screen. So we make a lot of effort to get proper documentation out for you guys. That doesn't mean you can't call us, but some of you might just try looking through the documentation, see if you can find it. So I have the documentation up, and questions of like, how do I use the router as a service tool? And that means if I'm walking down the hallway in a school building and have a router in my hand, how can I connect and check out how the VAV is working? Well, first thing you need is the HPO 5551 router connection tool. And what that is a USB cable that goes from a USB port on your laptop to the front of the 5051 router. And then a cable that's a 485 cable connection on the router to the bottom of a thermostat, or a net sensor, we call them. Those small discrete sensors also have this connection. Most all of our sensors that you hang on the wall have this connection on them. This connection is actually tapped right into the 485 network that goes from controller to controller. So then the next question usually is, okay, well, what do I have to do on my laptop to make this work? This is usually where we run into a few problems. As soon as you hook this cable, this USB cable that comes with a kit from your laptop into the front of the router, this cable has two purposes. It powers the router, and it provides a NIC card to your computer, or a network interface card. Here, let me show you my networking on my computer, where I have one plugged in, up and running. So this remote NDIS connection is the router on my PC. So you have to go inside that connection and set up an IP address that is the same IP address range, or on the same subnet as your router is, so they can talk to each other. This connection is totally independent of the building. It doesn't have to match anything. Matter of fact, it shouldn't match anything else in the building, this connection here. Okay, so this, you would have to assign an IP address to both the computer and the router that are in the same subnet. And then you have to assign on the router a UDP port and network number that matches Backstack, which is our virtual router on our PC. So let me show you Backstack in case you've not looked at that before. So this is a configuration for Backstack. And inside Backstack, we have to give it a network number. Now this network number that you're creating between here and here is totally unique. Doesn't have anything to do with your site. Okay, so you just make it up. You got a network number and a UDP port. These happen to be the default for IP connection 1. And then this is your NIC card, right? That, remember that? NDIS. NDIS. So you have to select this NIC card. You can't just let it pick whatever NIC card you want. It wants to. You have to select that one. And that's my IP scheme right there, the IP address for that NIC card. Okay, so I've got that done and I've got that done. Now I need to look at my router and make sure I've got that right. So I have it up on my browser. I've logged into my router. Here's the 206 and UDP port. Then I need to click this box right here called Use Learn Networks. And what that's doing is, let me show you on the picture again. So this network, this 485 network has a network number, but when you're walking down the hall, you're not aware that you're moving from one network to the next, correct? So as soon as you plug into a net sensor, you have no idea what this network is. So there's that checkbox that says Use Learn Networks. So as soon as you, and this is the network you want it to learn right here. So as soon as you plug into a net sensor, then this guy starts requesting what network from a router ahead of it, and then it hands it off. So the learned network is on mine is 45, but I had 201 typed into the box. But as soon as I say Use Learn Networks, it learned that my real network number was 45, and it is using that network right now. So I didn't have to change that because I have no idea when I move from one part of the building to the next what network number I'm on. Okay, so this doesn't matter as long as it matches between you and the computer. This is the one you're going to connect to the building. Now, when you connect to the building, let me show you in Connect. That's our software that we use. You want to make sure that you're using, if this is a big site, like over 100 controllers, even 50 controllers, you want to make sure you're using limited connection mode because you're trying to pipe all this data through one 485 network from one controller to the front end. So you want to be very specific about what data gets through to you. So in here, in options, in current site, you can say limited discovery. And when you discover them, they'll have these little pause signs, and they'll discover pretty fast this way. But they'll have a little pause sign. And then if you need to go to this rooftop unit right here, you'll have to right click it and say complete discovery. And then it will discover that one controller, the whole thing. And it takes a little while because I'm plugged into like this guy right here. And so it has to go through these two routers, through this router and back into this guy. Okay, it's kind of set up, it's like backwards networking. So it takes a little while to get all that data through a 485 network. Okay, so I think with that, armed with that information, and if you can take a look at that document here, read through this. All this gives you pictures. Here's Backstack, logging into the router, tells you what the default IP address of the router is, gets you connected, has all the data you need to get connected to a network. So you can go out, walk around the building and plug into this port on the bottom of a net sensor and not mess up your network, not get a bunch of duplicate networks. If you don't use Learn Networks, then you're going to get duplicate networks because that controller is going to be on two networks. So you got to use that Learn Networks. Okay.
So So one good follow-up question here, going back to Connect, is what information is discovered when you have limited discovery enabled?
Okay, so let me show you. It just discovers the name and address of this guy. So it doesn't, all of them. It discovers everything, its name and address. It doesn't discover all the objects sitting underneath it. Okay, so then you get a network layout with all their names and addresses, but you don't get any objects.
Perfect. So sticking in Connect, our next question, a little bit of a discussion. The question was, what are the best practices to create a code library? I'll send this one to Greg.
Well, the first thing is I would use the custom application wizard in Connect for common equipment that I work on a lot. So certain areas of the country, certain equipment I always use. So I would just build a custom application so I can deploy it to those. I would also create control snippets that you can just pull out of the resource manager and drop on a controller or system. And with both of these, I would store them in individual folders so you can find them easily and access them on each job that you go to.
So when you say code snippet, is that entire programs? Is that, chunks of programs, lines of code? What does a code snippet mean?
Yeah, code snippet would be just for certain applications. So let's say maybe you're adding static pressure control to a rooftop or air handler. So I'm going to create all the AVs, inputs and outputs that I need, and the control basic code, store it in one folder, and then I can easily just drag and drop that onto the controller, and it should take off for me.
Okay. We can open this up to the whole panel. Let's talk a little bit about when we may tell someone to use our standard application library versus encouraging people to create their own custom code. At what point do we push people into saying, hey, this is now a custom app and we want to use a code snippet or create a application standard for that customer?
Well, I think in our documentation, you can see some of our sequences or see all of our sequences of our standard app. So you can quickly tell if it's outside of that, what the equipment that you're working on, then you'd want to start creating your own custom programs.
I think most of the time when I get asked that question, I think of, when someone wants to do a boiler plant or a chiller plant or a, larger air handler, we get into fancier rooftops or bigger air handlers that kind of pushes people into, their first modifications of our standard library.
Yeah, we don't have any applications for chill water systems or boilers, but you can look at our standard code and pull a lot of information or, figure out how to write code just looking at our standard applications.
I guess the next thing I think about too is that, it's kind of a couple different methods to start developing your own custom apps. You can, there's lots of people that use our base app and then they're adding custom code to, an unused program, or some people rewrite our stock code altogether. What are some of the pros and cons of each method there?
Yeah, I think if you start with one of our standard apps and modify that, if you use the custom application wizard, then some of the parts to that are done for you already. So that's an advantage. It'll save you some time.
All right, we'll open this one up a little more. I think Kevin would have some good insight here. Aside from just control basic code, what other standards are, or best practices are suggested when we're talking about, developing an application standard that a system integrator is going to use?
Well, I think what I see most of the time that would help people or would help the technicians, especially if you have multiple technicians working for the same company, is a naming convention on objects. So that, like, if you're going to use this snippet, right, this is where I keep code snippets, custom programming. Let's say I have some optimum start programming here. Well, I need all these objects, and I need this programming. So if I have created this custom app and I use it on a controller, and another technician comes in and he creates his own optimum start sequence, and we're not talking to each other, then he's kind of got to start over and try to figure out what objects are being used and what control basic, how it's being put together. So if we share our code snippet like on a server and then agree on this is the programming we're going to use when we do optimum start, and these are the objects we're going to use, and this is every time I go to a job where there's optimum start, it's always the same. So we're sharing information, and part of that information is object names and programming styles.
Yeah, I think the style is interesting. I think in my experience, the integrators that I've run across that are most successful have someone or a small group of people that are really the ones that do the programming and drive the standard, versus having a dozen technicians out there all developing their custom code from scratch every time. So if someone can be the champion of the standard and enforce the standard, those reps seem to be more successful in doing repetitive work efficiently.
Yep, I'd agree.
All right, so like again, so we have control basic. As part of that standard, we have standard naming. What else should we consider when we're thinking about application standards?
I just want to touch on the standard naming again too. So what that allows you to do in Control Basic is not worry about physical point locations too, if you're using naming conventions in there and they're standard for you. But I think also, you should use standard program usage, like off panel points in its own program, maybe program 8 or 9. Safety programs should always be, or put it in the same spot, like program 10 or maybe the last program that you used. So I think those are all good standards too.
So standard locations for different functions.
Correct.
I guess the last thing that comes to my mind would be what priorities different items are written to in BACnet. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like the idea of keeping it consistent. So if you have the way you like to do things, now individuals kind of got to give up, and we have to all agree that the schedules need to write at this priority, or overrides need to be written this way. And net sensor levels, where we're dealing with graphics or straight up on the buttons on the front of it, where are they going to write, how are they going to write, and what priority are they going to write in? Those kind of consistencies will help in the long run, keeping everybody on the same page.
Well, and I think to me it adds ease of troubleshooting. If I show up to a controller, I've plugged in with my router, and I want to know what's going on with the active cooling set point. If I see a write from priority 9, I can kind of assume that that's coming from Control Basic. If I see a write from 8, maybe that's coming from a graphic or an override. So,
and for those customers that are using total control graphics, there's the information icon that's presented to the total control web user, and it changes state or color based on the priority that's in control. So keeping that in mind to kind of inform the user and let people know if there's something happening that's maybe outside the norm is helpful as well.
Sure. All right, so this is a related question. What are some techniques or tips on deploying repetitive code? We've talked a little bit about deploying with either the app wizard or the custom app wizard. You know, if I have a code snippet, maybe it's a go sub statement or it's its own program for Optimum Start. What's the easiest way to deploy that to my network?
Yeah, we've run into this before. I'm just going to give you some personal experience. We went to a job site and we had to make a change to every VAV controller. We had to make a code change. Well, we didn't want to have someone sitting there opening up every controller and writing the code in every controller. So we created some code in a controller that we liked, and then we were able to drag and drop it on the complete network. This is very powerful to drag and drop information from the resource manager across the network and drop it. You can drop it on a network, on the backnet service, on just a couple controllers or one controller. It's extremely powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility, because you can destroy everything all at once too. So you need to be very careful when using this. Read the screens that pop up when you drag and drop something on there. This has, I'm going to find an AV that's in the range of the controller I have. Space temperature. Okay, AV1. So I can drag that over. I can drop that all the way up here on the service. When I do, it gives me a list. Okay, well, all these controllers have AV1. So what's unique about the way we configured AV1 space temperature right here? You know, that's if you were to configure this object for something else, maybe it was not just space temperature, you configure this object however you want. Maybe it's loops, and you want to drop it on all the rooftop units. So this gives you a choice. Now you can say, no, this AV1 is really only for some of these other controllers, these VAV controllers down here, or something like that. Then I can just drop it on those controllers. So now it's going to tell me, oh, on those controllers that you selected, do you want to rewrite the name space temperature, or do you want it to keep its original name? So you can make choices here of what properties are going to be written to all those, because sometimes you want to limit it. Maybe you're just changing the units on that object. I don't know, but sometimes you don't want to write everything. We've picked some, well, you know, unpicked certain things, thinking that you probably don't want to write these properties and you probably want to write these. We just took a guess in developing our software. And if that looks good to you, you can, or if you would like to change it, you can say, oh, I don't want to ever write the COV increment, and I can now make that the new default. So as soon as I click that, now the next time I drag it out, COV increment won't be selected. Okay, and I can say okay, and it'll write down to those controllers.
Right,
so that's a powerful. Go ahead.
I say the next example I think is a good application for this. The question talks about setting up accumulator type inputs. Those aren't a default, or they're not default in our factory configuration. So if you're going to do that across a large number of controllers, you know, we would want to use the drag and drop for that. But as an example, let's walk through this setup of that accumulator input.
Yeah, the accumulator, it's typically is like maybe once or twice a year you get on a job where somebody wants to use an accumulator, and you may not be familiar from time to time, and you feel like, man, I have to call tech support to figure out how to use this thing. So I have one set up here. I'm just going to walk you through it. So analog inputs, we're going to look at inputs. These are our inputs on this controller. And you have to select one and change it from an analog. It's not an analog, it's not a binary, it's its own flavor. So you can right click on it and say convert to accumulator. Okay, so you can convert any of these inputs to either analog or binary. If you get a spare one and or add one, you can make it an accumulator. Okay, so I've done that to this one. So this is actually from a job that I have helped someone with. So they wanted to use it to do a water meter. So I had them go through the configuration. There's no wizard for this. Get it to come up. So I had them fill out this settings. So this is the maximum present value. And this is a little tricky because I have 9 in there because my water meter says that 10 pulses is 1 gallon. So 0 is a real number in accumulators. So it's 0-based counting. So I have 9 there. So 0 is actually one of the numbers. The pulse rate is adjusted on its own. The limited monitoring interval is a time-based function. It says how many pulses did I get in the last minute? Okay, so I had them fill all this out, and then to actually give it some real value for the end customer, I had to write some control basic to go along with it. I put it down here in program 8. And then some explanations. This is the explanations to the properties in the accumulator object. Okay, what all is happening in the accumulator object. But then I wrote some code, if plus, meaning the first time it's true, the accumulator 7, every time it changes by 10, I reset it to 0, and I increment AV40 by 1. So that means that I get 1 gallon. 10 pulses is 1 gallon, right? So AV40 is 1. Now, the last thing you want to do with an accumulator is lose data. Okay, so I've got a little piece of code here that says AV40 equals AV40 relinquished default in a power loss. So our controllers are pretty smart. They can actually sense the power dropping on the controller. And as the power begins to drop, this executes a power loss statement, which writes AV40 to the relinquished default value. Oh, I'm sorry. This is when the controller starts up, it takes the relinquished default value that's been saved on the controller and writes it back to AV40, so it continues from where it stopped. Sorry, that wasn't what that was. Down here's where I was thinking. If interval 1 minute and 30 seconds, then AV40 relinquished default equals AV40. So what that's saying is every minute and a half, I'm going to update my relinquished default value to how many gallons are in the present value. And then this is going to take that relinquished default value to write it back to AV40 after a power loss. So the number just takes right off and keeps going. If you're doing a lot of what I was explaining before was a warm start enabled with the controller being able to sense the power loss. If you're doing a lot of metering, I would like a whole bunch of metering. That's all you're doing with this controller is metering. There is a way for us to change our controller into sensing when the power is going down and writing these values off to the relinquished default, so we don't miss this 1 minute and 30 interval. So we can do that in the object properties.
Cool. So Kevin, with the you'd put the trending on the AV40, correct, for the water meter then to capture the usage?
Yeah, you can then trend that AV40 through like Niagra or Total Control so that it goes into a database. We keep some data on the controller. So we can, if it's Total Control, we can notify Total Control when our trend log is full, so you don't lose any data that way. But Niagra, you just have to, on an interval, go and get the data out of the trend log.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. The next
Sure.
couple questions we have were follow-up questions from our Total Control webinar. So I'll let Brad answer these. If the BACnet controllers exceed 50 on my network, do I need to order both TC BAC and TC BAC Unlimited, or do I just need to order the BAC Unlimited license only?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I actually might have misspoke in the webinar, so I apologize if I did. The answer to that is you do have to purchase TC BAC and TC BAC Unlimited if you're above 50. You don't have to purchase those at the same time. If you're upgrading, for instance, from a smaller site. So if you know you're going to have more than 50 controllers, you will purchase TC BAC and TC BAC Unlimited. The same would apply for if you had more than 50 KMD controllers. However, if you had a site that you were at 35 or so BACnet devices and it had been deployed for a while and they're adding more to the building or adding a new building and adding 50 or 100 more BACnet devices, and it's already licensed on that site key for TC BAC, you can then just purchase TC BAC Unlimited. You do not need to purchase TC BAC again. It's an upgrade to TC BAC is TC BAC Unlimited, so you can just purchase the TC BAC Unlimited at the time. So if you have a site key that already has TC BAC on it.
Gotcha. So that's a good segue into the next question is, when do I need to purchase an upgrade for Total Control? You know, let's talk a little bit about the version numbering system we use.
Yeah, so so we just released Total Control 4508. It's supporting HTML5 web page rendering now, and that's been out for a little bit. The version numbers are going to be 4 digits long. So for example, 4.5.0.8. So the important part of in terms of upgrades and licensing is going to be the first 2 digits. So the first is the major release. So when we revise the software, for instance, we went from Total Control 3 to Total Control 4. That's a major software rebuild. Just to give you some historical point of view on it, we started with Total Control 3 back around 09, and it was around. It still is around. Customers are out there using it today, but we didn't move for about 6 or 7 years. So that was the run rate for Total Control 3. Now, if you're running 3 today and you're moving to 4, yes, you will have to purchase an upgrade. So the other part of that is the second digit. If you're at 4.0 and you're going to 4.5, yes, you will have to purchase an upgrade if the second digit increments. So we've had a few releases of Total Control 4. That's been around for about 4 or 5 years now. And we started off with Total Control 4.0.0. And now we're at 4.5.0.8. We've had some other releases in there. One of them 4.0.4.8, and then there was 4.0.5.12. So we've only had, since we've been running Total Control 4 for the last about 4 or 5 years, we've only had one upgrade that you'd have to actually pay for the upgrade. So that second digit is really about major features that are within the same software package. So the first digit is the software package, and if you've ever used Total Control 3 and you're comparing it to Total Control 4, you're going to see a lot of differences. 3 looks a lot like the older Windows-based applications, and then 4 looks a lot newer. It has more of the ribbon bar, looks a lot like Connect, like what's on Kevin's screen here. So, for those of you that are maybe asking yourself, kind of planning, how much, do I need to allocate or think about how much am I going to spend on upgrades? So if you look back, I mean, historically speaking, we've had about 3 upgrades of Total Control 3 in the 6 to 7 years that we were adding to that, and we've had 1 upgrade in Total Control 4, and that's been around for about 4 or 5 years. So a good average, you think about it, like 2 or 3 years is, kind of something to think about as you're planning forward for what to expect for upgrades.
Perfect. So the last Total Control question, then we'll move to some Niagra questions. The last Total Control question is, with the new 4.5 Total Control, are there any additional plugins my end users need to worry about for viewing their web pages?
No, well, let me answer it this way. Yes, if you're using the Flash, we're still supporting Flash and Total Control 4.5. It's still supported today. A lot of browsers are depreciating the usage of it, so they're not supporting the Flash rendering anymore. But if you publish your pages in HTML5 with Total Control 4.5, you won't have to use any additional plugins like the old Flash plugins that wouldn't work across multiple device platforms and browser platforms.
Great. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and answer some Niagra questions that we had submitted. The first one is pretty common when you call into tech support. Where do I check on my machine for files and modules that are required for Converge?
All right, so when you're in Workbench, you can find our modules by going to the System Home. And then Modules folder. And then you can scroll down or click K, and that'll get you down to the K modules. So for our other KMC files that you need, they are going to be located, or you need to put them in C, program data, Niagra version, whichever version you're using, KMC controls, and the shared folder.
So while Greg's kind of navigating me around, I was going to also show a couple of these things. What I would recommend doing is, if you are kind of wondering, you want to go back and check on these things, it might be good to just add them as a bookmark, and you can just add these 4.7. What is this? This shared. And let's create a new folder for KMC files.
Okay,
and
those
we can do
files
that
also
for where we were. Sorry, I was going back to add my bookmark for here too.
Sorry about
this is my 4.7 modules. So now I can, if I do have questions in the future, I can easily access those and go check to see those files.
Okay, so
And we also,
if we can see
Oh,
what
go ahead.
where the files are, where do I tell the version of the Converge modules and application library I have installed?
So the easiest way to find out the version of our modules is to go to the platform and software manager.
Yep, so connecting to a remote controller software manager.
Okay, so
And
there's
you
the
can
module.
you can also find those in system home modules too by right-clicking on the module there and find the version.
Yeah, if we go back to our bookmark and look at the modules, now they provide an overview list of the modules, and this screen is nice because it's touch type, so you can quickly go down to it. And these are the modules that are installed on your Workbench copy. You know, not what's installed in the JACE. This is what you have available. But if you click on a module, you right click, you can view and look at the module view, and it will tell you the version there. And I think there was, so the app library, Greg, where was that? Where should I go again?
Yeah, you can find the version of the app library at C program data. And then KMC controls
Oh yeah,
and device application library.
there it is.
And that library is shared with Converge, the Converge tools and Connect. So if you're using Connect and you've installed it, that library gets loaded with the installation.
Okay. And
If you don't use Connect, if we're doing only Niagara, where do I get the library?
That library comes in the zip file with the modules and our other device knowledge base files and things like that. That library is in there, and you can just move it to that location.
Okay.
All right, so the next Niagara-based question we have is, how do I access the embedded programming if I have a standard BACnet device, not a KMC BACnet device?
so I'm gonna show you really quick. I have a couple, before I go into that, one thing I did want to show is this KMC object configuration node. So the difference, and I can illustrate that here with the slot sheet. If I got a couple different devices in here, some's a KMC BACnet device, and then this one's just a standard BACnet device. This KMC BACnet device is one that we deployed via Connect and then pulled in via our Converge service with a fingerprint, and it added our KMC application node. When we were talking about the device library, if I look at this application node, it will tell me what version of application library was used to deploy that. So that's helpful in the future as well if you're using that functionality. If you are, underneath files, there'll be a folder for KMC, and it will show you the library information that was used as well. So if you've deployed with Converge our standard applications, or you've pulled in an application, custom application that was deployed in Connect, look under those locations to get the version information and application information. And if you didn't, and if you're using a standard BACnet device, and that's or it's a job that is using our controllers, and somebody deployed it as a standard BACnet device, and you're coming in after the fact, and you just want to access the embedded programming, you can still, if the JACE has the modules, and if you open up a sidebar palette, for KMC BACnet, you can find our generic device. And so this 5901 does not have a KMC object configuration node, but if you drag and drop it on there, it will be added. And then you can go ahead and expand it and access the information on the device. So if I wanted to go look at and make changes to a program, you can go ahead and do that same thing with analog value objects and input objects. But you will need to have on the Jace in the remote file system up here in user home shared, you will need to have that device knowledge base and the modules installed in order to see that. For the most part, you're probably gonna, if you're deploying the job, even in Niagara and you're not using our application tools, when you do a BACnet discovery, I would really recommend that after the discovery, if you're gonna pull in one of the devices, that you pull them in as a KMC BACnet device. And I'll let this discover really quick, and I'm just gonna show you how to do that just in case you haven't seen it before. But when you add a device, it's right here, the type. You wanna make sure you change that to KMC BACnet device, just so that you have access to those. Now, if you didn't, you can still add the KMC object configuration node. One point to reference though, if you do that, if I look at this device for the 9301, I have an action to reinitialize, import, and create offline configurations and create and delete objects. Now, if I look at this 5901 that is not a KMC BACnet, I'm not going to have those actions on the device. We do that because we created this device and we get to say what actions are on the device. We don't get to do that on a standard BACnet device. So if you do need some of those actions, though, they are available to you. It's just that they are down a level lower on the KMC object configuration node. So you'll have to go there if you want to perform those actions. So if you do have these mapped into like a grid or something like that in a page, and you right click on them and you think it's going to show you the reinitialize, it might not be there. So you might have to go look for it down here.
Cool. All right, so the next question is, what existing data modeling and tagging are you guys as KMC enabling with KMC Converge? Or what tagging methodology do we support?
So we have a couple different ones, and in this Jace here, I actually have the haystack dictionary already in there. So haystack tags will be added. We also have our own tag dictionary for KMC as well. Now this device, if I were to bring in some points, it won't have the haystack tagging. However, if I deployed it with our own, with the Converge tools or Connect and pulled it in via Converge, so if we look at space temperature, for instance, we're gonna see that there's already assigned tags. Like, so here's a haystack air marker tag. And then we have some of our own KMC tags that we use. Here's some haystack units. So a lot of the data modeling is pretty much already set up inside of our templates, inside of our standard library to bring those in.
Gotcha, and that would, I mean, those templates are based on the same tagging we use in Commander. So if someone was going to access the tag set, it would look the similar from Commander or something running Converge that's been deployed. All right, so the last question for the whole panel before we wrap it up today is kind of an interesting one. It's a scenario. I've had issues when using a 5051 router in Niagara and getting extremely long BACnet busy times, and this makes my communication very slow. If I put that MSTP segment directly to the Jace, the issue seems to be resolved. Do you have any recommendations on tuning this communication, or what might be the problem here causing slow busy times?
Well, I think that could be backnet timing issues, which we have seen with some third-party controllers wired up to our router. So, and you could use some of the tools in the router to define that or figure that out.
Yeah, if you're looking at the router and you can connect, you can go into the diagnostics section, and one thing you might want to look at is the device status to see what devices are out there, if you might have a duplicate, or see if one is offline or going offline. The token use screen would also be really useful as well, so you can see the token being passed and seeing if devices are going in and out. We can also issue a capture rate from the router too, so you could set a capture and review that PCAP file that's out there on the MSTP line as well.
Yeah, I think with thinking about this, I would say that you'd want to certainly investigate the MSTP segment first. I would say 9 times out of 10, the issue is generally there, not on the IP connection side between the router and Niagara. So.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be tuning policies, because whether it's coming through our router or wired right directly to the Jace, it's going to use the same tuning policies.
Yeah, the other thing, maybe check where your home port is assigned. So here we have the home port assigned to IP port 1. If it was assigned to the MSTP port, that would be forcing the Ethernet traffic down through and bring in those devices that are shown as an MSTP device on this network, the 2000 network, instead of the 100 up here. And then that will, I believe, shrink the packet size that's going out.
Okay, well, that wraps up the questions we have for today. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panel for taking a little bit of time and answering some questions for our customers. If you guys have follow-up questions, we'll leave the chat window open for a few minutes. So please feel free to submit some questions there, or ideas or questions for future webinars. I hope everybody's staying safe and staying healthy, and we look forward to the next panel discussion for KMC. So have a great day and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.